This video is about functional security, and in particular, we'll talk about functional security for SiteAudit OnSite. And I'll go through a couple slides, and then we'll go look at an example. So, functional security is a feature designed to control access to various site audit capabilities, and control is maintained by assigning users roles, much like a Windows administrator assigns roles to permit or deny access to capabilities on a Windows machine. So very similar. Silent roles are defined and maintained within the SQL Server database used by SiteAudit. It's not required to use functional security, but it may be a very good idea if you've got multiple users using SiteAudit. Then you can assign different access levels. So that's the security model used by SiteAudit. SiteAudit supports the mixed mode, so you can use functional security for SQL authenticated users, or you could use it for Windows authenticated users. Both is possible. If you're going to use it for SQL authenticated users, then you've got an option. You can use the SiteAudit Viewer, which is what we're going to do, or you can use SQL Management Studio. If you're using Windows user authentication for functional security, then you'll need to use SQL Management Studio. So the roles are assigned by the SQL Server administrator. If you're using SQL Express, then you log in and you installed SQL Express and you're the administrator. Or it could be assigned, roles can be assigned by the database administrator, the DBA. There are 5 security roles, and I'm not going to go in great detail on what each role has capabilities, what their capabilities are, but you can go to the support portal, and then there's a whole article on the specific roles that each the capabilities for each of the roles. I'll show you some examples, and that'll give you an idea of what you might want to use in your environment. So functional security is optional, as I mentioned. I do want to give a little bit of information about what each role generally provides. So we can see here that sort of the base level of access we call a reviewer. And a reviewer has access to all the data. They can create reports. They can schedule reports. And so the reviewer functionality would be more someone who's responsible for creating weekly or monthly reports on the fleet. So they might want to do a report on supplies. Okay. The next level up is a manager, and they have more access. So they could configure discovery. They could set up alerts. And they could also use the new asset tool, which is included in SiteAudit version 7. So that's a significant level of capability. The next level up is the tenant manager. They can start and stop monitoring. They can adjust the data collection intervals. They can configure the the reporting website. So all of these different roles, they inherit the capabilities of the role below that. So a tenant manager would have the manager capability and also have the reviewer capability. Database manager can do backups. Server manager obviously can create databases, etc. So those are the 5 roles. Typically, what you find in a fleet management engagement is that most of the user will, if you're going to use functional security, will have a reviewer role. A few may have a manager role, and then a tenant manager may be like a local admin. Okay, and some examples are listed down at the bottom here. You can see if you were a tenant administrator, you pretty much get everything in terms of the setup, all the good stuff. If you're a reviewer, then you have limited access, and it's just an example. Okay. One other thing is that a user can only have one role per customer per database, so you can't assign a user multiple roles. Okay, let's look at an example here. how you set this up. So here we've got a data collection, and what I want to do is I want to show you from, say, the beginning. So let's suppose you're going to set up a new database for a new data collection, and I'm showing you the new 7.0 user interface for the database setup. Some things have changed. What's out front here now is you can create a database from this button. You can back up and restore here. You can install new schemas from that selection, and then functional security, which we'll come back to. But I'm going to create a quick database here so we can use that. So I'll type that in and we'll create a new database. It should just take a minute here. And then we'll go in and we'll set up some functional security roles. So let's go to that new database. So you'll notice there's obviously no data here. And so these are all so I'm an administrator and I have all these access reports, etc., so forth. So let's go and set some functional security roles. So I'll again go to the database configuration. I'll select functional security. There are, what you can see here, there are some other users, and those users are from the other database, but none of those are assigned to this database, so they don't have access to this database. So we'll need to create a new user, and we'll call this user Pat. And we'll give Pat a password. So we'll add Pat. That's the first step. There's really only two steps here. One is you create the user, and then the second thing you do is you assign the user a role. So we're going to assign Pat the level of reviewer. I could assign Pat other roles, but Pat's job is just analysis and reporting. So I'll assign Pat reviewer role, and now Pat's listed here on this database. So let's go ahead and see what Pat can see. What we're using in this example is we're using the SQL authentication, and that's as I mentioned before, you can use through the viewer. So I'm going to go ahead and select the SQL authentication, and so Pat would be one of my so if I'm the administrator, Pat may be one of my users. So I've given Pat Pat's username and credential, and Pat indeed can log into the database. So let's see what Pat sees. So Pat would only see database. They'd be able to do reporting. They wouldn't be able to start or stop the monitoring. That's a tenant admin function. They would be able to do schedule reports. So that's what Pat's role would be, and that's how we'd set that up. Let's set up one other role, and I'm going to go back as the system administrator because I want to, actually I don't need to do that. I want to set up a second role here, and I need to do that as an administrator. So let's create another user, and we'll call this user Jane. And we'll add Jane is there. And now I need to add, second step being I need to assign her a role. So I'll give her the role of manager. Now I can see Jane as a manager here. So let's look at what Jane can see. And again, Jane's going to be logging in using SQL authentication. And so Jane puts in her password. She says, okay. And now Jane can see more things, right? Jane has access to set up notifications. She can set up thresholds. She can set up an SLA. Reporting, of course, so she's inherited the rights of reviewer. She can also use the asset tool. So that's really important. The asset tool is a new function in SiteAudit 7, which allows you to create custom fields. You can import the organization structure, the discovery, and you can export and import data. There's other videos available from our YouTube channel, and one of those videos, actually there's a couple of them, 4 of them, that talk about using the asset tool. So you can go to our YouTube channel and find out lots of video information there about the asset tool. Okay, so that's fine. So now we've seen the reviewer and we've seen the manager role. Now let's take a look at another database, one that has data. So let's suppose we have a different scenario that we want to add functional security to an existing deployment. Okay, so there's data in that deployment. The other one we looked at was you were setting up prior to going perhaps into production. This one, we're already into production. We've got data. So let's go ahead and use some functional roles here. And we see I'm the administrator here. So what I want to do in this case is I'm going to again use SQL authentication to access the database, and I'm going to provide a new user here, and we'll call this person Mark. Mark's got a username and password, and again, like before, I'll assign the role here to Mark. So I'll assign him as the tenant administrator. Okay, so Mark has a lot more access. He's got the reviewer access. He's got the manager access. And now Mark's got the tenant administrator. So we'll go ahead and see what Mark can do here. So Mark gets his username and password and signs in. And so now let's see what Mark can do. So Mark has got, let's just do this. Mark's got all the good stuff here. So they can, Mark can manage and unmanage devices. They can set up the mail server. They can do the inherited access that reviewer has. But also Mark can start and stop monitoring, can use the asset tool. So Mark as a tenant administrator has pretty much full capability. So you might consider maybe Mark would be maybe a local admin. That might be the role you give a local admin. Now, if you visit the Netaphor support portal, you will see a document, an article that details all the roles and permissions by role. So I'm not going to go through them all here, but you can get that information from our support portal. So that's functional security for SQL authenticated users. You can also use Windows authentication. For that, you would need the SQL Management Studio tool, and there is documentation on our support portal on how to do that as well.